Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name's Cameron, and today I have an absolutely insane flight of 5 different vintages of George T. Stagg in front of me. It's one of those videos where I feel like I need to pinch myself and wake up from whatever dream I'm in. Really, it's just the fact that I have the most incredibly generous and supportive viewers, patrons, subscribers, and friends of the channel. This video would not be possible without Toshi Bake, who has sent 4 of these George T. Staggs my way, and Matt Porter, ADHD Whiskey, the man himself, who sent this media sample of the 2023. So let me run this down for all of you. At the beginning of this video, you might be wondering, why do this? Why taste 5 different vintages of George T. Stagg on camera, most of which are long gone? Truthfully, I have no idea, but I don't want to just sit at home and drink these samples that were sent in. I feel like it would make some good content. We can talk about it, and there's probably that one-off person out there that owns some of these older ones and hasn't opened them and is trying to decide which old George T. Stagg should I open? And maybe this video will give that person some insight. For the rest of us, maybe it's fun. I'm not trying to show off or anything because these are not my bottles. Again, they were samples sent in, and I could not be more thankful for this opportunity. So let's run it down very quickly. Starting over here, we have the 2023 George T. Stagg. We have the 2020 George T. Stagg, 2010, 2009, and 2008. A really wide range of years spanning 13 years. 5 different releases within that range, a lot of different proof points, some of them hazmat, some of them in the 130s. We'll talk about each of them as we go through it. What I'm gonna do in this video is I'm gonna go one by one. There might be a little mixing, going side by side, doing some A-B comparisons here and there, but I'm gonna try to go one by one in the beginning of the video. I don't know how this video is gonna end up being edited. It's one of those things, it's gonna be a longer video, so I apologize in advance, but I wanna take my time with these whiskeys. I don't wanna cut out too much because I want it to be kind of a holistic and truthful experience as to what I'm going through as I taste them. We're gonna actually start with the 2020. I've always said that the 2020 George T. Stagg is kind of like a benchmark for me. When I think of the line, when I think of the profile of George T. Stagg, I always think 2020. Maybe that's just me, maybe that's just the one that I'm the most familiar with. The 2020 is coming in at 130.4 proof. It's in this glass, and we're gonna check it out now. We're gonna start here, we'll go to the 2023. Afterwards, we'll go back in time, 10, 9, and 8. Here we go, 2020 on the nose. All right, so on the 2020, this is so much concentrated red candied fruit. Raspberry, strawberry, cherry, big, intense candied versions of those fruits are coming through on the nose. You can just smell this humongously sweet, but very intense and very proofy profile. That's a tough one to say. You can definitely tell that it's that Buffalo Trace sweetness on the nose, but it comes off in a way which is kind of the George T. Stagg effect in my mind, where it surpasses those standard Eagle Rare kind of sweetnesses, and even Stagg Jr., as we used to call it. It kind of goes beyond those into this land of such concentration of pure flavor. What I mean by that is some of the Staggs or Stagg Juniors, they get a little bitter on the back end. They're younger barrels. And this George T. Stagg is clean. It's down the middle and clean with its profile of all of those intense candied fruits, but it also lets you know on the nose that it has some age. Yeah, there's this leather note. It's a fresh leather note on George T. Stagg. It doesn't go funky like Jim Beam or Heaven Hill leather. A very, very fresh leather note, and that's what I get on super highly aged Buffalo Trace products. Let's go to the palate now. On the front of the palate, those red candied fruits are there. Big spice, big cinnamon spice. That's a hallmark of this expression. It's a hallmark of the Stagg Juniors. I think I'm just gonna say Stagg Junior from here on out. But what's really crazy is that in the mid palate, it kind of transitions over into this almost granular vanilla sweetness, like a vanilla bean ice cream almost. And at that point, at that breaking point in the mid palate, that is where I get the most enjoyment out of this 2020. I think it's just incredible whiskey. The one critique I would have of the 2020 is that it feels a little bit aggressive for the proof point. So 130.4 is high, but it's not ridiculously high in comparison to some of these others that we're gonna taste. I don't wanna say that it's thin, but it comes off a little bit sharp for the proof point. So That makes it feel thin because it's sharpness without enough kind of body behind it. That's a very, very, what do I want to say? I'm splitting hairs by saying this. I'm being super, super picky about a great whiskey from Buffalo Trace. I recognize that. And as we go through this tasting, please keep that in mind. All of this in perspective. So with that said, 2020 is great. We might come back to it, but let's go on now to the 2023. And this is one that I've been pretty critical of. Proof point on here, 135, a little bit of a higher proof. I was critical on this one. It felt overly hot. Just not the biggest fan. Let's go to the nose now and see in this flight if it's anything different. No, it's not. The nose for this, even like the 2022, which I don't have here, the fact that I'm talking vintages of George T. Stagg is still blowing me away. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you have the wrong impression of the channel that we're doing this. This is just too closed off and tight on the nose. It's like you can't get below the spice to get to the actual body of the whiskey. Yeah, I was hesitant, like looking back on my 2023 review, I always go, well, maybe I should have compared it to another year of George T. Stagg because maybe I'm just crazy. Maybe it's the day that I tasted it. I don't think so. I really think the 2023 is kind of closed off. Let's go to the palate now. The palate on the 23 is better than the nose. More sour fruit, darker fruit. It's not as bright and candied red fruit. You're getting into more of those grape plum notes that we know from Buffalo Trace products. Grassy on here. Grassy similar to the 2022. I don't get that on the 2020. And then all the while, humongous spice on the 2023 at that 135 proof. But to me, I've got to say, it comes off like a younger whiskey. I don't think it's remarkably younger, if at all, than the 2020, but it comes off like a younger whiskey. I just think the quality of the barrels that went into the 2022 batch, excuse me, the 2023 batch in this sample, I just don't think the barrels were good enough. I know that they did not release a George T. Stagg in 2021, maybe for good reason. And if they are having quality issues with these barrels, maybe not specific only to the 2021, it would make sense to me because I don't think this is the best showing for George T. Stagg. I know I'm being critical. I know anybody that gets a George T. Stagg is kind of lucky to get one. I would be lucky to get the 2023, a bottle of that. In this case, I can be picky because we have so many samples here and so many different points of reference. So I love the 2020 as a benchmark pour. 2023, it's not quite doing it, but now it's time to get into the crazy stuff. And we're gonna go back in time now to the 2010 George T. Stagg. This is coming in at 143 proof. This is about as hazmat as you can get. 143 on this, I cannot wait. I don't know that I've really dug into this and tasted it before. So here we go on the nose, 2010. Where do you start with something like this? It does feel a little tight on the nose, a little acetone almost on this, which is something that many people are gonna know from Brown-Forman products. But I think once you get into hazmat territory, it's often that you get an acetone note on a hazmat whiskey. It just kind of comes with the territory on a lot of them, even if the distillery profile is not known for having that kind of an acetone note. For instance, the River Roots single barrel that I reviewed, I said it's my favorite finished whiskey of 2023. It was finished in port for 6 years after a 7-year initial maturation. That whiskey just had a little acetone on the nose because it was 146 proof or something like that. I just think that's kind of a feature of whiskey at this proof point, but let's not focus on that too much. Underneath it, you get what for me feels like a dusty wild turkey profile. There's kind of this old school butterscotch, but it does have the cherry notes of Buffalo Trace, but not in the bright way of today. It's deeper, darker, richer, more Luxardo cherry as opposed to candied red fruit, which is what I was getting on the 2020. This one feels darker, more butterscotch, and really, really resembles like an older wild turkey profile for me. It smells delicious. I'm sure once I get this on the palate, get that 143 proof, you know, on the tongue, acclimate to it, I can come back to the nose and be more specific, but let's get this thing on the palate now. Cheers. Remarkable whiskey, this 2010. Just the difference of flavor that 10 years makes in this whiskey game that we are all playing right now. It's hard to believe for me that we've gone from this 2010 to what this 2020 is. It's such a stark difference. And I'm not saying that 2020 is bad necessarily, but it's in a completely different league than the 2010. And I don't know if it's the barrel quality, 10 years prior. I don't know if something with the grains changed, something with I don't know. I mean, the aging conditions are similar, right? I don't know exactly what it is that causes this difference, but to get this incredibly rich, woody, butterscotch, Luxardo cherry experience from this 2010, it is awesome. It's a real treat to be able to taste something like this. I will say, again, I'm gonna split hairs. At that 143 proof, I think there's a balance issue on this, where there's kind of these weird bumps in the ride as when you sip the whiskey, as it rolls back, as it develops into the mid palate, into the finish. I think there are some weird bumps and turns that you take. It doesn't feel like a totally forward-moving, comprehensive development. And again, I know that might seem like a really abstract criticism, but I think a whiskey like that when you taste one. A whiskey that just develops perfectly from front to back, and there are no offshoots or weird turns. This has some of those moments for me that, the flavors are amazing. The concentration of those flavors, amazing, but the actual development on the palate could be better. I gotta do one more sip of this one. Funky, funky leather now. The 2010 truly tastes like a Dusty. And it's a 2010 bottling. That's crazy to me that it has this profile. So we will probably revisit this here in a second, but it's time now to move one more year into the past to the 2009, which is bottled at 141.4 proof, just below the 143 of the 2010. And in this case, I don't have much of the 2009 left. This is the very first sample of super old George T. Stagg that Toshi Bake sent my way. Again, thank you, Toshi. And I have long held that this 2009 is the best whiskey that I've ever tasted. I'm gonna be curious compared to these others. It's, the 2020 and the 2023 are probably not gonna hold up to these three older versions. Of course, I could be wrong, but this 09, again, I long held that this is my favorite. Let's check it out on the nose. 2009 on the nose is actually a little more closed off than the 2010, so that's kind of surprising to me. We are still in hazmat territory. What's sticking out to me on the nose of this one, it has a similar butterscotch, old school Luxardo cherry, the things I said on the 2010, similar on the 09, but what stands out over those notes is a little bit of this sourness. There's more freshness on the 2010, just overall in the whiskey. The 2009 has a musty basement, overstewed fruit. It gets even funkier. Even, it's smelling like it's going to taste a bit bitter on the palate, but in a way that's exciting and different, not in a way that's gonna be unpleasant. So we gotta get this on the palate now. That is amazing. I think this is probably, so far, the 09 is probably the best. This is so full of flavor. Getting into coffee, getting into espresso, even darker, even richer than the 2010. And what I like is that it doesn't have those development issues on the palate when you take a sip of this whiskey. It's just a forward moving whiskey on the palate. It just kind of hits you and it goes, develops so nicely. I can't take a second sip right now because I need to save the rest of this in case I do a little side-by-side towards the end of this video. But 2009, remarkable. 2010, so good, so freaking good. And then these others, definitely a more modern take on George T. Stagg and kind of Buffalo Trace in general. Finally, we're gonna move to the dark horse because this is one I have zero experience with. This is the 2008, bottled at 141.8 proof. Again, we're in the same kind of 140 to 143 range of the last couple. So for all intents and purposes, let's say that these are the same proof. Let's check out the 08 on the nose. Oh my goodness. This smells like a National Distillers product. This smells like super high proof old granddad from the 1980s. It is just butterscotch. It's just like sickly sweet, syrupy butterscotch. Oh my God, smokiness in here actually. Wow, this is crazy. There's, oh, what is this note? Like blueberry, blackberry and blueberry on here. I'm in giggle mode. I've had a few sips, I know, but I'm in giggle mode for 08. All right, here we go, cheers. Oh. Oh my God. I promise you, I'm not putting on a show for you guys. That is unreal. This could be top 5, top 3. This could even be best whiskey I've ever tasted. It is in the conversation. Wow. And I don't even think I've said a note on the palate, I'm sorry. The 2008, it kind of transcends the idea for me of breaking it down into notes, because this whiskey feels so put together that it's challenging to try to pick it apart into individual tasting notes. Like when you get to the 23 and the 2020, you can clearly delineate as you're smelling it, as you're tasting it, these flashes of flavor that you're getting. You can put them together in your head. You can create kind of a holistic image of the whiskey. And as you continue moving back in time, those lines start to blur. And it starts to just become like this amalgamation of tasting notes, essentially. And I like that. I like older whiskeys for that reason. I recently put out a video on the channel where I tasted a Lagavulin 21-year Scotch distilled in 85, bottled in 07. And it's a similar experience to drinking this 2008 George T. Stagg, where you're just hit with so many flavors at once, but at the same time, it's just a singular flavor because it's so well put together that you don't even know how to talk about it. That's what this is like to me. First impression as I've gone through this, and I've not done side-by-sides, which we're just gonna do a couple and then we're gonna wrap this up, is that the 08, top of the pack, just lights out whiskey. All-time whiskey for me. 09, very closely behind it. 2010, suffering from some of these development problems on the palate, but great profile overall. And then we get to these other two, which again, who would not be excited to have a 2020 or a 2023 George T. Stagg in their collection? But it's almost like it's a completely different whiskey. The only thing linking these is the sweetness of the profile and this red fruit note, whether it's candied, deeper, darker, richer, you know, as you go back in time. We would be lucky to have any of these, even these more modern versions. But this whiskey is significant stuff. This feels to me almost like a wine tasting where you get to do all these vintages. And I just want to say again, I feel so lucky. Thank you, Matt Porter and Toshi, for sending these samples. I'm gonna do one more sip of this 2008. It's butterscotch. There's like an aged cheese note to this. That's something that I get on a lot of dusty whiskeys. This kind of, I would call this like an old Gouda. You know, it's like Gouda cheese and butterscotch and just leather. Rich, sweet oak. Yeah, vanilla, but funky root beer float vanilla. So now what we're gonna do is just do a quick down the line, 2010 9-8. Okay. So 2010, a little spicier. Yes, it's the highest proof at 143, but it carries a little more spice. Specifically on this one, I'm getting cinnamon and some clove in the background. Yeah, big aromatic spices. Maybe the most aromatic spice of any of these whiskeys. Clove, nutmeg too, I would throw in the mix, but big cinnamon. 09, this is almost like an MGP whiskey. It has the dark fruit blackberry notes of an MGP whiskey. Yeah, blueberry, blackberry, grape. It smells like the Rebecca Creek 16 year that I have just loved so much. 127.7 proof, I think it's barrel 21. This has that kind of dark MGP profile to it. And finally, the 2008. Everything's so well integrated, and the backbone of it is the oak. I don't know what else to say about the 08. So I think the 08 on the nose definitely reigns supreme. I'm interested by the fact that the 2009 has this MGP-like profile to it, and 2010, it's just this huge aromatic spice profile. Here's the deal. 2008, definitely my favorite of the flight. 2009, a very close second. 2010, you know, it's this weird kind of middle ground. Very good whiskey, has those dusty notes, suffers on the development, but I think it's really, really good. These older three, you know, I hate to feel like I'm influenced by the fact that 2008's older, and I think maybe older is better, so that's why I've put it in my top spot. I don't think that's what this is. I truly believe the 08 is the best of this bunch. I think these three, though, are some of the best whiskey I've ever tasted. And then when you go back in time, or rather forward in time to 2020 and 2023, you start to get into this more modern profile, clean down the middle with the 2020. But when you put a 2020 next to a 2008, it's not, it just doesn't even feel like it's related. Thank you for hanging in with this video. I don't know how the editing's gonna go, but I appreciate you checking it out. I cannot believe, for the last time I'll say this, that I'm able to taste these 5 George T. Staggs. So thank you, Toshi, thank you, Matt Porter. And if you have the opportunity to get into any of these older George T. Staggs, if a friend has a bottle, maybe you're at some crazy dusty whiskey bar, these are worth paying over for? Yes, absolutely. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. Cheers, guys, and I will see you next time here on Drums and Drams.